Greetings and merry magical beings. Do come in and sit for a spell. In this video, I'll actually be sharing my one true encounter that I've had with the Fae, namely the domestic house brownie. The brownie is a domestic fairy of British lore. There are really many whimsical stories that tell of little people dressed in dusty rags that tend to chores that are left over from the day. And these are, of course, children's stories meant to teach and entertain. However, thousands of people from all over the world share their encounters with entities straight out of a fairy tale. And I'm here now to share my true encounter with a house brownie that came to my home. It really all began shortly after my husband and I moved into our little blue home in a subdivision. It's really not prime real estate for a fairy, as one would think. In the backyard, there are 5 large oak trees, and actually the builders did ask us if we wanted them to be removed. And of course, we told them not. And interestingly enough, this is where it all began. One quiet morning, I was knitting alone in the backyard and watching the birds eat out of the feeder. I was out there for probably about 30 minutes when suddenly I heard like a popping sound. And the only way I could really describe the sound is by comparing it to those little white poppers that are thrown to the ground for the noise to be made. And I looked up from my knitting and I realized that this strange sound came from the middle of the tree I was sitting next to. And I looked up at the tree in confusion, and what I saw falling from the tree branch was more mind-boggling than this elusive popping noise. What looked like thin silvery paper was spiraling down from the branches to the ground below. And I got up from my chair for a closer look. And I was close enough to reach out and touch these shiny flakes. However, I seemed to not be able to do so. Like I knew I really was not supposed to touch them. As I watched these little flakes hit the earth, they just all dissipated right in front of me. After this is when my husband and I really noticed odd things that seemed to be happening at night. The mail we tossed on the coffee table is neatly stacked and sorted by the next morning. And the clean socks that I leave in heaps are folded up in the laundry room. The dog's bowl is cleaned and filled with food and fresh water. All these things were really odd, but rather enjoyable actually. One point of particular fixation was my knitting basket, is where I keep all my materials and supplies. And times when I got my yarn tangled up in impossible knots, I would just discard it out of frustration. And then I would wake up the next morning, the yarn would be rolled up in a ball and my tools were all put away nicely and neatly. And also all the scraps of yarn left over from my projects would be gone. The longer this went on, I grew more suspicious that we were not living alone anymore in the house. I brought it up to my husband, and to my surprise, he agreed with me. A while after we came to this realization that we had something that was living in our house and tending to chores at night, he went away out of town for a few days, and this really seemed to upset the brownie. In the spare room, I heard a series of soft thuds and clamor when he was gone. And one night I went into the room to investigate, and I only found a bunch of party supplies and extra tablecloths tossed all over. At first I figured it was only gravity at work. So I put everything back where it was and where it went. As I went back to the kitchen, I heard the same clamor as before, and I went back into the spare room and once again found it a mess and cleaned it up once again. And this occurred 2 more times before I finally went to bed. And I'll admit, this actually rather scared me. When he got home, things went back the way it was for the most part. Some nights things were not tidied up at all, and other nights everything was put back as it was before. And this went on and off for a while until one day I was in the kitchen making some bread. And actually out of the corner of my eye, I saw a streak of red and brown run from around the corner and towards the fridge. I jumped at the sudden activity in my kitchen, of course, and I spun around towards the fridge and was stunned at what was peeking at me from behind the refrigerator. I figure about 14 inches in height, was staring back at me, almost in complete awe of what he was experiencing. He wore a burnt red hat on his head that was roughly the size and shape and color of a potato. He had small wrinkles all over his face, and his eyes seemed to be too big for his face. The nose and mouth were in proportion to his head and body. This little sprite wore all brown, thin cloth, and I really couldn't see his feet as they were behind the fridge. Without thinking really, I rushed towards the little figure, and he jumped a bit and turned around and ran behind the refrigerator, which I then pulled out of the fridge quite quickly and with little effort in my excitement. When I got the fridge to the middle of the kitchen, I found nothing. It appeared that the brownie had left my home, and really he hasn't come back since. I think I offended and frightened him. I hope he comes back one day. Thank you.